This episode of Analog Resurgence is brought to you by Squarespace. Use the link in the description of this video or the code Analog Resurgence to get 10% off your first purchase at Squarespace. The world is truly full of beauty. You got clouds, bodies of water, trees, people, that's a big one. And capturing all that really neat stuff on film is really neat. Ektar, Portra, Gold, Superia, Velvia, they all capture the colors of the world around us on film in their own special way. But what if there was a type of film that made things look so weird and is now so ridiculously expensive and hard to find that you're either never going to shoot it, or if you do, the pictures you take are never going to be good enough? Yes, it's color infrared slide film. This is Kodak Ektachrome infrared film, EIR for short, and it's unlike anything I've ever shot before. Back in January, I received an email from John, a former employee of the now long gone Steichen lab here in Toronto, asking if I would be interested in a couple rolls of infrared Ektachrome for the channel. To my absolute amazement, he sent along two 35mm rolls of Ektachrome infrared slide film that had been frozen since purchase in the 1990s. So this video would definitely not have been possible without you, John. This stuff has an expiration date of 1999, and I've only shot one roll so far, and I'm saving the other one, but it gave me incredible results. Infrared slides look fantastic. I shot this roll at 200 ISO with a yellow 12 filter over the lens. The images are all suddenly rendered in reds and blues and pinks, and they turn landscape shots into some weird Candyland version of reality that would probably be hell to live in, but looks incredible. And to actually have this stuff developed properly as a reversal film lets you marvel at the results right there on the roll that you shot in the camera. I spent every second of shooting this stuff with absolute fear that it was either too expired or I was too stupid to know what I was actually doing. Actually, in general, it's pretty debatable as to whether I know what I'm doing or not. This is yet another video topic that is impossible to do real justice to by just showing off film scans and recording the film on a light panel. To actually hold it up to the light and to see it, to actually mount it and project it, is just a little beyond words. And yes, you can shoot color infrared digitally and you can play around with a similar look like this on other films like lomography stuff, but true color reversal infrared film is very, very special. But also, you might not be into this at all and it's just like wacky looking footage, so to each their own. Now let me throw a little bit of science your way. Infrared is part of the light spectrum that is beyond the human ability to see. The wavelengths of infrared are longer than those of visible light. Infrared is electromagnetic radiation. We can't see it, but we have ways of seeing it. And so does the predator. In 1987, a group of Marines encountered something deep in the jungle. The predator is a ruthless killing machine who is able to see in infrared, making him one of the most dangerous threats that man has ever... I forgot where I was going with this.
There's something in those trees.
Most film stocks lack any real sensitivity to the infrared spectrum. There are black and white infrared films that do have sensitivity to this portion of the light spectrum, but for a while there existed color infrared film. Color infrared film has that extended sensitivity to the light spectrum, which allows it to capture something very unique. On film tech sheets, you can see the spectral sensitivity curve for different film stocks. When a film is sensitive to wavelengths above 700 nanometers, then congratulations, kid, you've got yourself some infrared film.
She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
Because of infrared film sensitivity, you have to treat this stuff very differently from other kinds of film. It has to be loaded and unloaded in complete darkness because there's a high chance of fogging. I didn't actually see this canister until I asked for the lab to return it to me because I had to load the film in full darkness. And in order to get results that look like this, you need to shoot it with a colored filter. There are lots of suggestions for which filter to use based on the color shift it adds to your shots. Yellow, orange, and red are typically the ones people use, and for my shots, as I mentioned on this roll, I shot with the yellow number 12 filter on the front of my lens. This gave me the vivid reds, pinks, and blues that people tend to associate with color infrared. I've also seen it mentioned that for color infrared, don't use an R72 infrared filter. Those filters are better suited for black and white infrared film, which is still around and much easier to get a hold of, but it doesn't look like this. And finally, focusing is also different on infrared sensitive stuff because the wavelengths are longer. The majority of vintage lenses have a red dot on them for infrared focusing. This is your new reference point for what to focus to on the barrel of your lens. My advice is just focus normally through the viewfinder and then adjust your lens focus over slightly to the dot. It's not a huge deal, especially if you shoot at higher apertures like f8 and above for a large depth of field. It makes things much easier to work with. That being said, I messed up focus once or twice on this roll anyways, because I'm only human. Unlike somebody else who uses infrared. You also need to be sure that your camera and lab processors aren't using any sort of infrared light or sensors, because that will fog the film and ruin your shots. I spent a long time with this in the fridge, just being too unsure of what I really wanted to shoot. But you know what? I wanted to shoot landscapes and trees and some people, and maybe my stuff isn't crazy unique, but this is what I wanted to shoot and see the results of, and I'm also just fully in love with this stuff. Landscapes really are the big subject for people with infrared film because of how infrared light reacts with plant life. The chlorophyll in trees, which reflects infrared, gives us these wild looking results that people are drawn to with this stuff. Shooting it in cities or places that lack a lot of vegetation gives you much less interesting results. My shots in the city and even by the lake here are just really blue because there's not too much to reflect or react with infrared lighting in these settings. You don't want to shoot this stuff at night, and it's best used when the sun is lower, like in the morning or the late afternoon. Despite what you might think, color infrared doesn't just exist as something to flex on Reddit though. In the past, it was primarily intended for use in military, medical, and scientific applications, having been developed initially by Kodak for the military during World War II. The common use people point to is how in military uses it could be shot over jungle areas in order to detect camouflage. Infrared in the jungle. Sounds a little bit like, oh, I don't know, the Predator? It also had uses in areas such as studying glaciers and pollution, things that generally the Predator is less interested in. But of course, this specialized film definitely started to bleed into artistic uses. In 1967, Carl Ferris used infrared photography for the North American cover of Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Andy Nathanson shot infrared for the cover of Hot Rats by Frank Zappa in 1969. In the 1970s, Elliot Landry captured artists including Bob Dylan and Van Morrison in infrared. In 1997, the Predator used infrared to capture the conflict between warring drug gangs in Los Angeles. But really, into the 80s and 90s, the interest in this look seemed to fade. One of the much more modern examples, though, that people talk about whenever infrared comes up is the Enclave by Richard Moss, where he used Ektachrome in 16mm motion picture film to capture rebel groups in the Congo in 2013. Very stark, vivid images of people amongst plant life captured on this very unique format. Color reversal infrared film is technically intended for a developing process called AR5, a special process for these infrared aerial films, but one that's hard to find today. From what I can tell, Rocky Mountain Film Lab in Colorado is the only place that maybe still offers this process. Also, Rocky Mountain Film Lab in Colorado has abysmal reviews with people warning you to never send them your film. There was even a local news story, so maybe be careful.
We've also been trying to track down the owner.
Sorry, that mailbox is full.
And you know what you should also avoid in Colorado? The Xenomorph Predator Hybrid. Luckily, this film can go through the regular E6 color reversal process that films like Ektachrome, Provia, and Velvia use. However, tech sheets explain that images run through process E6 will be higher in contrast and appear more saturated in color. In scientific and/or technical applications, process AR5 is recommended where comparisons to historical data are desired. So AR5 is definitely the process for results used in scientific or super precise applications, but E6 is the easier and probably more enjoyable process for this. So I shot Kodak EIR, but a lot of people know infrared color film by the name Ektachrome. Over the last 15 years or so, Ektachrome is the much more popular version of color infrared film that you tend to see and hear about, but was never properly released by Kodak themselves. Ektachrome was only ever made in large bulk rolls for specialized uses and not sold to the public. Photographer Dean Benici purchased a large amount of Ektachrome bulk rolls in order to cut it down into smaller rolls for individual use, and thus began the Ektachrome project.
You son of a bitch.
Aerochrome isn't technically the same as EIR, but I couldn't find detailed examples of the differences. They're very similar at least, and if we look at the spectrosensitivity curves, there doesn't seem to be a huge difference between the sensitivity of them for infrared. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring the video today. You've been around, you've been on the internet. I don't have to tell you that Squarespace is definitely one of the best ways to make a website today. Integrate a storefront if you're selling your own products. Create a blog based around anything you want, like what you think of the Predator movies. Good, meh, terrible, meh, terrible. Use it to showcase your work, like if you've shot your own infrared film and you want to base your entire personality around having shot infrared film, which is definitely what I'm gonna start doing. Whatever you want to do, Squarespace makes it really easy. They have great support, they have lots of templates, everything is easy to use. You don't need to know how to code or do anything crazy like that. That usually makes things way more difficult. So check the link in the description or just use the code AnalogResurgence in order to get 10% off your first purchase at Squarespace. Today, this stuff is disappearing. Like, infrared color film is maybe the worst thing to try to get into now because all the Ektachrome infrared is over a decade expired, which is a big deal if it hasn't been stored well, and the Aerochrome project is kind of nearing the end of its life, having supplied rolls since 2007. I've seen different years thrown around for when Kodak themselves ended production on infrared color. Some say 2007, I've seen 2009, and even 2011. But regardless, it's been gone for a while now. You can still get odd-sized sheet film from the Aerochrome project, but for any other rolls, you're going to be getting them from resellers who hopefully have rolls that were just stored really well. It really comes down to how badly you want to shoot infrared color versus how badly you want to keep like $150. There is, of course, the imitator, Lomo Chrome Purple. Lomography introduced their purple film in 2013 as an alternative to the discontinued infrared color film. It's a color-shifted film which gives you results in the same vein as infrared sometimes. I haven't shot any yet, but it's definitely not as interesting as true infrared film. And from all the samples I've seen, it never looks quite as good.
One ugly motherfucker.
It's cheaper for sure, and you can actually buy it.
So I got that going for me, which is nice.
And it can give you wild, interesting results, especially if you play with filters, but it doesn't actually have any real infrared light sensitivity to it. It's also not a color reversal film. Lomo Purple is meant for negative developing, so you lose that aspect of actually shooting EIR or Aerochrome. So it's really just trying to imitate that sort of look. And you know what also imitates things? The Predator.
Danny boy.
Mike?
Look into it is all I'm saying. Infrared color seems like one of the least likely things to ever be brought back. During its prime, it had entire medical, military, and scientific industries to support its production. To resurrect something that specialized now for the current film market, which historically speaking is very small, seems super unlikely. Really what you should take away from this is you might never get to shoot color infrared film, but trees are really cool, and those are still around, at least for now, so that's something. Thank you so much for watching this, and while you're here, show the channel some love by subscribing and, you know, all that good YouTube stuff. I could not have done this without John sending me this stuff, so again, big thank you for putting this stuff in my hands, John. Check the description below for ways to help support the channel through Patreon, as well as a little bit of merch that's available. And I'll see you soon.
We are certain that this being can see in only one spectrum of light, infrared.
Infrared.